Here we go. Come on, Mama. Come on, Mama. Good girl.
Hello and welcome to Sheep Chat. I hope you're as excited as I am. Sheep are one of my favorites. I'm so excited today. We have such a wonderful panel of guests to talk about the Navajo-Churro sheep today. So get excited. This is going to be awesome. My name is Brittany Sweeney, and I am the communications manager for the Livestock Conservancy. And Cyndi Dvergsten is here, and she's going to introduce herself and everyone. So let's get started.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Cyndi Dvergsten. I'm the Shavem Savem coordinator for the Livestock Conservancy, and it is my pleasure today to introduce all of our guests. From the top right, I'm assuming you are seeing everybody in the same order that I am, but we have Rose and Eugene Vigil. And hi guys, thank you so much for joining us. Rose and Eugene are both traditional Spanish weavers from the Chimaya, if I'm pronouncing that right, Chimaya region. And Rose is also a teacher, weaving instructor. So we're gonna hear and see good things, hopefully lots of lovely photos of their work today. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. Nikyle Begay is here with us today. She is a Navajo shepherdess, weaver, weaving teacher. She is the maybe writer and editor of the Catch Pen, which is the quarterly newsletter of the Navajo-Churro Sheep Association. And she was also an inspector for registration purposes for the Navajo-Churro Sheep Association. So welcome, Nikyle. Thank you for joining us today. And Zefren Anderson is with us as well. He is joining us again. Zefren was a panelist at our 2019 Sheep is Life conference. Zefren is also a Navajo weaver and has lots of experience with churro sheep as well. Thank you, Zefren, for joining us. We're glad you're here today. And Cyndi Dvergsten and Mike Rich. Cyndi sits on our board. They have been raising Navajo-Churro sheep for 17 years. Cyndi has a very sizable registered breeding flock, and she also sells for meat. And thank you for joining us. All right. And I think we're going to hear from Zefren first today. So Zefren, if you want to go ahead and unmute and tell us about yourself and your path as a weaver and a little bit about what the churro sheep means to you in your community.
Well, first of all, I'm Mud Plan, born for the many houses, and my mom's dad is Red House, and my dad's dad is Salt. I'm a Navajo weaver from the Four Corners. Instead of being like multi-generational, I actually reestablished weaving within our family after 3 generations of it not being taught actively. And I've been weaving professionally for the past 3 years. I've won multiple awards between the Herd Museum at the Herd Museum shows and SWAIA. And I particularly work with archaeology and historic Navajo weaving, so anything from the 1800s to as early as the 900s in techniques. Like with the one behind me, this is a common technique that was around the establishment of Chaco Canyon to about the 1300s. So you'll see that in the background. I did raise sheep when I was young, up until I was 6. They were all Rambouillets, and you know, I remember them being very finicky. And to reestablishing churro as a viable option for Navajo weavers and showing them that what they've been told and taught from the history, Nikyle can go into it, where we've been told everything from that they dry up water, that they're detrimental towards sustainable grazing, that there's certain characteristics that, you know, are detrimental toward land or your products. Basically all untrue. Because I've seen what they've been able to accomplish with this sheep into museums, and we're still trying to get back to that, so we can go back more into the history later. And I just work with those techniques, and you know, their techniques are so old that a lot of my weavings now have been labeled contemporary. So that's why I sit in this little bubble that is both new and old, simply because they haven't been used in a long time. And that's me in a nutshell. I'm a full-time student at the Net College, trying to get my working towards my degree in fine arts with silversmithing with a Navajo emphasis. To possibly go into teaching later on in my life, because you know I'm working as a professional weaver now, but as I retire, I was thinking of becoming a teacher.
You're a man of many talents, aren't you? And modest. That's okay. I'm going to interject real quick because I forgot to show the map of the region you all are in. Cyndi, do you want to show that map real quick and just do a quick review or overcap of where everybody is?
Yeah.
Yep.
What was that again? I'm sorry.
Is this the right map? There were
Yeah,
two.
this is the overview. Just so people can get an idea of where we come from here and what the region's like. The Colorado Plateau is a large area that spans all 4 states. The Rio Grande River, this is one of the better ones I could find, but it's a very long river. It starts in Colorado, goes all the way down to Texas. And so a lot of the traffic with the sheep and the Hispanic trade went up and down that river. And then the Spanish trails, the same thing. The main one in the middle there is where I live on that, and Rose is on that. And they basically went up and over and around the Navajo. At first, they started going right through Navajo land, but they got into too much trouble, so they started going north and around. So there were a lot of sheep went back and forth on that trail too. And then let's go to that next map. That's one that shows where we, yeah. Okay, so I should have probably put where, I'm sorry, Nikyle. But Nikyle's out in the kind of in the middle there towards the Hopi, Canyon de Chelly to the west of there. And then I'm right there at the 4 corners, just literally you can see it from my house in Areola. And then Rose is over by Chimaya, which is over on just really close to the Rio Grande River there, north and east of Santa Fe. Right, Rose?
Yes.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, we're about 8 miles from the Rio Grande, from Espanola.
And then Zefren, he's from the 4 corners too, just across the border from me down in Shiprock, right in the corner. So both Zefren and I live right in that 4 corners area there.
And that's a very arid. Well, we hear 2 things. We hear it's a very arid region, but Cyndi, you clarified to me that there's actually a lot of fabulous grazing for sheep in that area. Am I right?
Well, let's go back to that map real quick. Okay, and Zefren, you guys jump in whenever you want, but historically, Navajo lands far exceeded the reservation. The reservation is in green, but the lands actually went way to the west, south, east, and north to these large mountains. And Mount Blanca is 14,000 feet, and Hesperus, which you can see from my house, is almost 13,000. And so, no, the land is very diverse. It has low river bottoms. It's got very high mountains, and an incredibly diverse types of weather, anywhere from about 10 inches on the low side and about 60 inches of rainfall on the high side. So it's not a hot desert. It's what you would consider a cool desert and mountains along with, and then if you think about the Rio Grande Valley with large rivers, the San Juan River, the Rio Grande, the Little Colorado, and the Colorado River itself all flow through this region. So
great. That's a great reference. Thank you, Cyndi.
Yep. And you guys add whatever you want in there.
Yeah, Rose and Eugene, will you go ahead and do a intro of yourselves? Tell us a little more than I might have.
Yeah, we're considered Rio Grande and Chimaya Weavers. We live here in the Espanola Valley. The Rio Grande runs through the Espanola Valley. We're in a small little community called Chimaya. We've been weaving since 1987, since we got married. I attended the local college, got a degree in fiber arts. Been weaving for 33 years, running a small business, also teaching at private and public institutions, as they call me, to teach, to help move the fiber industry forward in our area. So Jean's an 8th generation weaver. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's weaving has run in my family ever since they settled the Chimaya area.
And the date when they settled?
It's well, it was two different settlements, but the last settlement or permanent settlement was in 1706. That's when the Vargas came into Santa Fe, and that was after the Pueblo Revolt, and they settled their differences to a point, and they got to settle. They settled in the area, and they lived together. Probably sort of harmonious in the area here. But yeah, my family's been weaving the whole time. I haven't been weaving full time as much as Rose has. I've been doing it part time because I worked for UPS, and I retired after 30 years, and it's been 4 years that I retired, so I've been weaving full time now for 4 years. Both of us do Spanish market. We've done the Estes Park wool market. We've done
Taos wool
market, and then the one started in Edgewood,
which is the heart of New Mexico fiber show.
So we do a lot of different shows, and we have our own studio, so it keeps us busy.
Sounds like you guys are very busy. Yeah. In a little bit, once everybody's introduced, I'd like to show some of your photos as well, too, so you can talk about the weaving process and if there's any significance to the patterns or that sort of thing that you want to share. We would love to hear about that. Okay. Nikyle, are you there? Can we get you to? Yeah. Hey.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your path?
Sure. Yaat A, She Nikyle Begay and Shia, Twilichini Nishle, Totoni Bashichin, Deshini A Dashiche Dopi Patoni Dashinella. Greetings. My name is Nikyle Begay. I am of the well, I almost said the Navajo. Let me translate it. I am of the Bitterwater clan, born for the Big Water clan. My maternal grandfathers are the Red Streak people, and my paternal grandfathers are of the Deer Springs people. And in our culture, it is very important to identify yourself to establish kinship. So I am here deep in the Navajo reservation. I live near a little town called Ganado, and I have been around sheep all of my life. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she has commercial type sheep, so that's what I was raised around. It wasn't until about maybe 1995 when I was 6, when I was introduced to the Navajo-Churro sheep, as well as the Denebe'ina organization. And ever since then, I have just been so intrigued by these wonderful creatures that grow long wool and have 4 horns, and that were very common in our in our region and to our people. So when I was 13 years old, I started to take this a lot more seriously, and I began my own flock of Navajo-Churro sheep. And along with the responsibility of raising Navajo-Churro, or at least raising sheep in general, as a Navajo person, was my grandmothers told me, well, now that you have sheep, you got to do something with them. And I'm like, I am doing something with them. I'm grazing them, I'm shearing them. They're like, well, it's not only that. You're going to have to learn how to weave, and you're going to have to learn how to dye and spin. So it was this whole process of me learning everything since the beginning. I would say, learning how to spin and card was kind of like a children's pastime back then. So I was maybe about 9 years old. When I was 15, I was a senior in high school, and that's when I really started to get serious about weaving. After that, I did everything that, a high school graduate was supposed to do. I went to college, university. I worked for a Fortune 500 company, but, it just wasn't me. So in 2013, instead of moving to Silicon Valley to pursue or to continue my career, I just decided that I want to go back home and raise sheep. So that's what I did, and I've been doing it ever since, full time.
Awesome. How big is your flock, Nikyle?
Well, we literally tripled within the past month because we're lambing right now. So we normally try to stay at about 20 ewes. But like I said, with all the lambs, we're at about maybe 40 now, and we still have a few ewes left to lamb. So,
Nikyle, what do you like most about the Churro sheep, aside from the history, the heritage of your people? If you take that out of it, why do you like churros?
And other than them being well suited for our area, I would have to say their mothering instincts. Around the time that I was in high school, I was also raising commercial sheep through for like FFA and 4-H. And whenever I bred those sheep and they lambed, it's kind of like they just plopped them out, got back up, and just went right about their business while the lamb was just there, crying its head off, and mama's just over at the feeder again eating. Whereas the Navajo-Churro, the mother would literally just, it went from being just a sheep to like her instincts kicking in and being very protective of this lamb and just wanting to mother it. I think that's what really, and it still impressed me to this day.
And those mothers, those ewes, they're known for their twinning. Is that true? Or not necessarily?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And how about out on the range? Because you guys, the shepherds out in the Southwest, you're an open range. You're not, a 20-acre farm. You guys have sizable areas of unfenced pasture, grazing land, correct?
It's different. I'll let Nikyle answer for her area, and then I'll answer for ours.
So if you visit my Instagram account, I tend to post pictures of how diverse this area is as opposed to like where Cyndi is. I mean, we're still in the Southwest, but here where I live at about 6,000 feet, if I go out my back door, there's just sheer cliffs and rocks. And if I go out the front door, there's a nice wide open valley. And majority of the time that I've been raising sheep, we have had open range conditions, meaning that the highway that's in front of our house here had not been fenced in for so long. But a few years ago, they, because of how dangerous it was to have large livestock near that highway, they finally enclosed it. So, but even then, with that cut off, because it's just so open here, we're still running the sheep on, wow, a lot of land.
So what is that practice like? Like, how do you turn them out in the morning, or do they go out for a whole season? How does that work?
So I follow the sheep. The sheep know where to go in certain seasons. I find that in the summer, they like to go up the mesa behind our place and graze there because there's trees and when I say trees, it's like little cedar trees and junipers. You know, there's nothing really big and elegant for them to take shade under, but they like to be up there because it's a little higher up. You know, once you get up on the mesa, it's probably like 500 feet higher than we are down here at the base. And it's cooler. It tends to be cooler, and there tends to be a lot more for them to eat in the summer in terms of like native grasses. And in the spring, now during lambing, they like to be like out in the lower lands, so at the base, in the valley. And I've noticed that when they're actually going to lamb, a lot of them will actually come back up towards the rocks along the mesa, the cliffs, and they'll start nesting along there as, I guess, maybe a form of just feeling protected by it. But there are during different seasons that they tend to normally go to.
Nikyle, I've got a couple pictures of your sheep from your Instagram. I'm going to put them up. They're very, very cute.
Very cute.
I love it.
Yeah. I sent you a picture of his sheep with his red rocks behind him. If you can get that in the email, I don't know if it's too hard. There you go.
Oh,
okay, there you go.
Wow.
Isn't that beautiful, guys?
That's a great photo.
Nikyle's Instagram is full of gorgeous photos. You should definitely check it out.
So that's representative of where I live. You know, I hardly don't ever get to take pictures of them in the valley because it's so dry right now that hardly anything grows. We have four-winged saltbush that's growing, that's actually quite invasive, that they'll eat, but in terms of like native grasses and everything, they won't go out there. And now that they're lambing, they try to stay near their pen.
Thanks, Nikyle. Zefren, you were going to tell us about what the practices are like in your area?
Well, half of it is oral tradition, anecdotal information from my grandmothers, and what I've reconstructed for the northern region, since this was the primary migration nexus for the Colorado Plateau, what they call the Rocky Mountain bison. There was, you know, most people think buffalo, but there were different subspecies of buffalo. And there was the smallest one was the one that had the greatest range that crossed the four corners between, you know, as far north as Manitoba, around in that area, down the plains into our area, where they winter in the plateaus of Mexico, north of, you know, past the driest area of Mexico, but in the area that's very much like our region for the winter. So with that, our grazing tradition mimicked that between, you know, the area that we said that orally we would go because we would have so much clout with the people around there that in the wintertime, our livestock would be grazing in the Verde Valley, in that area in central Arizona. And then in the summertime, it would be as far north as Wyoming, at least in the time periods before, you know, the takeover of this area by the U.S. Army. So reconstructing that, you know, we were one of the last, the fence lines for our region, everyone argued against it all the way up until about And the fences started going up in the 1930s as a response to overgrazing. And our family maintained that the fences were responsible for the desertification that was intensifying that area. And every time more fences go up, it was going to disrupt more of that cycle. Because for us, there's only 3 to 4 weeks of forage available in 2 growing cycles in our region. And those the forage is supposed to be eaten up before the spring and fall monsoon. So the 4 months between them are actually the growing season for all the natural grasses in our region. And there would be 2 different species. One that, you know, both species have a whole year in their growth cycle, but one is geared more towards spring, the other is more towards the fall. So in the area that we live, the sheep and livestock would only be here for those time periods. So a lot of times it'd either be more north as the encroaching U.S. settling happened. We would be more towards Colorado in the mountains and down in central Arizona into like Flagstaff area. And as more and more settlers came in, our rangeland shrunk to the areas where we're actually grazing full time year round in areas that were only meant to have, you know, intense grazing, you know, maybe 10 to 5% of the year. And this is anecdotal knowledge with our family. You talk to anyone now, they might say I'm crazy because they don't believe buffalo was ever present here. That, you know, there's a lot of what we call traditional plants that are invasive plants. Like there's the sage, there's the salt cedar, that they weren't invasive as much prior to all this fencing that happened. So that's for us. Our family argued against the fences, but what did it for us was the oil companies. My great grandma's youngest sister lost 50 of her sheep when an oil truck ran them down using one of our roads, our water hauling roads. And they didn't even stop for her. She actually jumped out. She tried to save them, but she almost got hit. Wow. So for us, the animosity towards the oil companies hauling oil on, you know, the water trails is why we put the fence up. And it's been a contentious relationship with the state and the Navajo tribe because of that fence, because it was for our protection at the beginning. So we have case law in the 1950s where we took the Navajo Nation to court to have those fences for protection. So right now we have 36 acres, or 36 square miles split up between 900 descendants of the original 3 sisters in that region. But their land, their grazing rights went, you know, Wyoming to Arizona at some point in the past. So it's history like that. And most people don't talk about it because it's just, you know, this oral tradition. But, you know, people get to see like, oh, Navajos were in this set spot full time one year. Our sheep were here. No, there was a lot more cooperation when it came to these sheep. Even I believe there's a certain family that may have had a Navajo ancestor that did get a large flock of Churro sheep that originated from the Denetar region in the early part of the 1700s. Where that family has the same fiber available that, you know, Nikyle and certain other families have in the western part. For our area, because of the oil and the change to wage work, we bought premium merino and Rambouillet sheep early in the 30s on recommendation from, you know, the Indian Service and the Indian commissioners that these were going to save our area. So our experience in our area is more towards the commercial breeds versus Navajo-Churro. The poorer families in our area were the ones where they kept the Navajo-Churro, and those are the families that are strongest in the weaving tradition now. So that's how I do this whole look back into history, and a lot of Navajo philosophy. If it exists in nature, it exists in our philosophy. So when we talk about Navajo-Churro and all of that, there's always other animals that replicate what Navajo-Churro is, so that the term never dies, just what it represents always in flux and changing.
Thank you, Zefren. Rose and Eugene, did either of your families raise sheep prior to your getting into weaving?
My grandfather, Trujillo, did a lot of, he was a shepherd for a lot of the families here in the Espanola Valley back in probably the 20s and the 30s. And then they always had small flocks of sheep as a meat source. And then it was back in 2006 that my cousin Francisco Trujillo wanted to start bringing back that tradition. And I told him, well, the Churro sheep is one of the best tasting meat on the market. You might want to look into raising those. And if you do, I'll help you out because I could use the fiber for my products. So it was back in 2006 that we started going around, and that's how I met Cyndi. And we got some sheep from her farm. And then I also have bought fibers from Cyndi for our work. And Jean's family, I think probably way back, and the same thing, they always had sheep as a meat source. Of course, the industry up here in Chimaya, they got away from using churro, and they use yarns from a company, J.H. Clasigans. So it's not, it's woolen yarns. It's not churro. And I prefer to use churro. It's just a stronger fiber. It makes a more beautiful textile. And yes, the meat is very good. I just bought some lamb from Cyndi.
Nice plug. Sounds like sheep and weaving go hands in hand for all of you for generations, which is so cool.
Yes.
What is it, Rose and Eugene, that you specifically like about churro fiber for weaving? You said it's strong and it's durable. What's the process like? Do you actually buy the yarn? Do you actually buy raw fleeces? How does that work in your world?
Well, we helped down at my cousin Frankie's farm to share the sheep. And so that's always a fun and eventful day. And we're also vaccinating sheep. They'll slaughter sheep sometimes if we need to. And then it creates a pit roasted meat at that point in time. So it becomes a family affair. The one reason I like working with churro, like I said, it's a strong fiber, but it also has a luster and a look to the final product. You can see the coats that are behind us, and the one that's off to, it's kind of like, it's to my left, but I think it's to your right on the screen. That one is all churro. And then we have another coat. Let's see if I can get it on the screen here, which is some of the woolen fiber. And it's off on the back side of where I'm sitting over here. And that one doesn't have as much luster, much luster in the final product. So it's just, it creates a more beautiful final product when you look at it.
Those are beautiful coats.
As Rio Grande weaving, and that is what our museum, the Spanish Colonial Art Museum, is trying to get people to do products with churro fiber, because it continues and perpetuates the traditions of the Spanish that came in. Also those cultures that are mixed cultures, which Eugene and I are both. We're both Pueblo and Spanish. So it continues that traditional heritage. So it's the food and the art and the song and the food. So my cousin Frankie wanted to raise the sheep mainly as a food source to feed his family, to feed the community, to feed his community of penitentes, the religious secular group on Lent, which is coming up. So that was his way of getting into, and then I landed up getting the fiber. Then we take it down to a mill in Colorado to have it processed. They do all the washing and the carding and the cleaning, and then we pick it up in the yarns. But we get the fun of being on the farm with my cousin, helping them share, helping them vaccinate, eating with them, partaking. It has become a family affair, a closer family affair. Even my aunt said, this is how it used to be when grandfather was alive. So it's brought back those traditions into the whole Trujillo family.
And wonderful bonding experiences. And yes, to keep that history and those traditions alive is beautiful. That's a wonderful thing. Cyndi, can you tell us a little bit about your flock, Cyndi and Mike, and how you first came to get interested in Navajo-Churro sheep?
Sure. Well, our farm's Areola Sunshine Farm. We've been in. Our farm's been around for a long time, so we've done a lot of things other than sheep. But I was invited as a speaker at Sheep is Life by Cyndi Dvergsten, and that was back in '97 was the first time, and the second time was in 1998. And so my background is in, and so is Mike's, is in natural resources. So I teach like grazing planning, land management, holistic management, business management, those kind of subjects. And so I was called upon as a speaker. So that's when I was first introduced to both the Livestock Conservancy and Cyndi Dvergsten and the Navajo-Churro sheep. But I didn't fall in love with them quite right away. I fell in love with turkeys first. But then I started working more and more. I worked for Heifer International for quite a long time. I worked with the Navajo Department of Agriculture. The more time I spent out on the Navajo, the more I realized that if I really wanted to understand Navajo people and the Navajo landscape, I needed to understand the animals better too. So my friends picked up their Churro sheep right away in '98 from Dr. McNeil, that release. And so I went to them. I said, let me try a couple of those, because I'd never raised sheep before. We've raised a couple cattle, but not sheep. And that was it. That was the beginning. Now it's been our life for all these years. And also maybe possibly, and Nikyle will relate to this, possibly an addiction. But so we love them. And I've been trying to keep some of those older genetics going with my sheep, my flock. The ones that came right out of the Navajo Sheep Project back in the '90s. So, and nice. so you know, some of those slides I put in there, they kind of show the different products, the different things we're doing with the sheep. But I have been breeding for a longer fleece, silky, not very coarse, kind of an in-between. Clean legs, clean face. There's several different types of churro, and that's the kind that I'm kind of like aiming for with most of my genetics. And I want them to be smart and fast. So I don't want them to be stocky. I want them to have nice legs on them where they can run. And I think that's all important to them doing well out on the rangeland.
So they can get away from predators?
Yeah, exactly.
Cyndi, you mentioned that the grazing areas out west are, well, of course they're different. They're going to be different plant species, as Zefren mentioned about the grasses seasonally. But you mentioned the fact the other day about it being so important to keep those babies and their mamas together and out on the range right out of the gate, right after birth, because the mamas are teaching the babies what to eat and what not to eat. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with shepherding as Nikyle might have, but when you take the animals out on the rangeland, and I think Zefren alluded to this, there's just a whole diversity of plants, shrubs, and things that we consider weeds that they love to eat. And even in my own pasture, I have about 15 maybe different kinds of plants. So it's that diversity of forage that's important to the health of the animal. And they know what to eat, when to eat it, even the time of year. And, you know, can you put up that picture where it's got the big pointy mountain and the summer range? Yeah. See, this is more down by where Zefren is. That's the shiprock, by the way. So that would be winter pasture. And then up on top of the mountains, you have lush grasses and a lot of different shrubs and forages. And so these animals evolved with that really, really good diet. And they always had good feed, like Zefren was mentioning. They went all the way up into the mountains, all the way as far as Wyoming, way into central Colorado with their sheep. And they were always moving. They always had good forage. They never overgrazed. Overgrazing is a whole different thing. But the animals were always moving. So, and shepherds knew how to direct them and what forages they should have and shouldn't have based on the time of year. And so that is really important to understand how these sheep came about. And then put up a picture of my pasture with all my good sheep in there. So I just have a tiny small piece of land, so I can't range them around the way I would like to. So I try to manage to grow a lot of forage in a small area, whereas out on the range they have a large area to graze in. So we practice holistic management, and we've worked very hard at bringing the production of our land up to a lot, so where we can carry a lot of animals in a small area. But at the same time, I do my best to mimic that, what they would do, going out on the range, coming back in, when to do it, and allowing the flock to have a matriarch. Things like that, you know, is important to their intelligence. So
I love that photo shows the diversity of the sheep, the different colors and the fleeces and the different sizes, and that's beautiful.
And there's one of that, it's a big white sheep in a picture. I just want to show you what we mean by luster. That's luster.
Yeah.
That's what makes that wool so amazing. And Zefren, you guys understand fiber art more than I do, but I know the difference between a weaving that was done with this versus some other breed or commercial. It's totally different. And Rose too, with your work. So.
Brittany, can we show the photo? I think it was a photo Cyndi submitted of all of the different types of products made from churro sheep.
Yeah. There was a few of them, but that yeah.
Is it this one?
No, it was fiber products. Sorry, but those are delicious looking products.
Made me hungry.
Yeah. We might have to come back to that.
No,
that's cheapest life, and okay. I wouldn't mind if you just went through that, because to me, and Nikyle, you guys jump in there, please. And Rose too. We've all learned together all through these years, and it's that celebration of churro, of Navajo-Churro, of the way of life, of shepherding. Just like Rose alluded to, you enjoy the meat, you enjoy the fiber, you enjoy the animals. And we've always celebrated and shared that as a community of sheep breeders and shepherds, so fiber artists. So and Zefren's on the board of directors for DBI, and I've been in the past. I'm just kind of on the sidelines now. But and Nikyle's been on the board of directors.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. This is all my wool. That rug was woven with my wool. The The felting, we have a mini mill felting machine, so we do felting like that. Those are just different pieces of felt. That a good friend of mine spun. I don't spin. I've never mastered that, so I don't know if I ever will. But a good friend of mine spun the yarn down there, and those are our pelts and some of the roving and wool products that we sell. So
I want to take about 5 minutes to share my screen.
Sure.
A timeline.
Absolutely.
Do I have the access to do that?
You should.
Yeah, please.
It should be at the very bottom.
Okay, here. All right. I'll just do this one. Wait. We'll just do this one for now. Do you see a? Do you see a Word document up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna try to take 5 minutes if someone can time me so I don't go over it. This is the understanding that I have that connects, all the different wool traditions in the Southwest. That there's 3 different periods. There's pre-Onate, there's Onate, and then there's the Pueblo Revolt. So, I don't dispute all the different theories that people have said about the origin because they're all true. But they can be biased if they just use the official accounts because most people say Onate, sheep. But there was a whole 100 years before Onate, where there was livestock already being brought in here, whether legitimately or legally during that time period. So you've heard of the cracker sheep, you've heard of the Gulf Coast sheep. The reason why they're of that nature is that their ancestors is the same ancestors that would become the Lincoln breed from northern France, that they were imported into Florida as early as the 1560s. And they were there just for maybe like 4 or 5 years before the Spanish took over all of that and expelled the French. So that's all this up here, talking about how much that sheep was intrinsic to the Franciscans, because the Franciscans are the ones that managed that breed after the French were expelled. And that breed was imported into Cuba, imported into Chile. Select missions that weren't under the direct control or oversee of Mexico got this sheep as part of their normal operations. This sheep's ancestry goes back to what the English were weaving in the 14th century that was called wool silk. Wool that was of a fine fiber nature that it was comparable to silk. And it was one of the favorites that the Dutch used for all their high-end coats and fashions. So that leaves the connection of why, Bayeta becomes significant because they have that connection to that old breed. And then, in that time period, there were people bringing livestock and families, Spanish families, into the area as early as the 1560s. So it was never just Onate. There was a lot of influx before that. Then there's official history that also is in the crosshairs with the history of the Franciscan Church and the Jesuits. They were always in conflict with each other over who could control the quote-unquote souls of America. So this is why the Franciscan presence in California and their access to sheep is different before and after the Pueblo Revolt. So there's that. The Pueblo Revolt is not just Pueblo. It has alliances with Spanish, Navajo, Jewish, and Arabic religious refugees and elite Asian house servants. All of those groups are in play during the Pueblo Revolt. So by the time the Spanish come back later, they're already integrated into whatever society they're in, whether they're like descendants of the Rio Grande Spanish, Rio Grande Basque ancestry, or the Pueblo ancestry or Navajo ancestry.
Zefren, do you mind if I interrupt you really quick and see if you can make your document a little bit bigger on the bottom?
So the big thing is the Barzan Brothers. That's 1820s, and they reestablish a fine weaving tradition that a lot of historic New Mexican weaving comes from. Because one of the brothers marries a woman in Isleta, and then their descendants start that revitalization of weaving in that area. As Isleta had this unique crossroads of historic Navajo slaves, Pueblo families married within Mexican families, and Basque families that weren't allowed to return to Cholula on the other side of the mountain. So the weavings in this area around Isleta are some of the finest examples of twill, tapestry twill, a mixture of cotton and wool. A lot of the wool that's raised in this area are the same as what you would see in the most finest example of 1700s Navajo textiles. The finest Navajo textile and chief blanket era happens somewhere between the 1630s. That it interlinks with Awatvi to the foundation of the Barzan Brothers in there. Out of this tradition, Lorenzo Hubbell's origins are within this group out here. So they were not an outsider group when it comes to weaving and wool, if you go far enough back. So I'll stop sharing. So and that goes to like the different traditions and wool traditions of it, that a lot of Navajo weavings have this artificial bias that they're pre-Barzan Brothers from the 1820s or so, when really the raw materials that they would take advantage of were already available to us as early as the 1650s. And it's that interconnectivity between all the different cultures that created the chief blankets. Because I have, someone give me 3 minutes and then cut me off.
And do we have a photo of a chief blanket we can share?
Yeah, I'm gonna go into entire screen. Okay, I'm gonna go into the entire screen and try to bring up. Sorry if it looks open with.
Zefren, if you don't mind me interjecting this little piece of info, but he was actually invited, Zefren was actually invited to speak at the Livestock Conservancy's sheep conference that happened, I believe, in 2019 in Santa Rosa. So some of you might have had the pleasure of already meeting Zefren in person.
Sorry if I'm going through this quickly. I'm trying to find the blanket, the wool blanket stuff, which is at the end. Sorry. And I think I had a really rough draft of that timeline of, over there, and I know it caused a lot of controversy because it was just so out there. Okay, here are the oldest historic fragments of Navajo weaving from the early 1700s. That a twill tradition, both open-faced, a tapestry twill, and plain weave, very tight plain weave with very fine weaving, was already integrated into our culture as early as the 1700s. And also Western style knitting, this red and black, or this red and yellow sock that's on the corner there. I'm trying to get to the wool stuff. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I had the wrong. Ah, there we go. It's in this one. All right. So I've been on this kind of like mission to find when, where, and what to see what we need to do in terms of like getting the wool back to where it's at. And Cyndi and Nikyle and some other Navajo shepherds have already recognized that and started their efforts. These are from historic Two Gray Hills flocks that they were already crossbred, with Rambouillet and Churro, showing some of those characteristics. All of these pictures are from the 1920s, and the resulting wool that was coming out of this flock. That even though there was guard hair and wool in there, they were able to get these very fine, very tightly twisted, very soft, drapable weavings with luster all the way up until the 1920s. And this is the characteristics that I've been trying to look for chief blanket material, because right now I've been actually having to blend the blend in order to get that kind of luster and fineness back, and trying to see like if there was any examples of, you know, the sheep pictorially. So this is like what we have now, is that there's two distinct types of wool. The one that has finer wool and guard hair that is easy to sort out. And then we have this wool that has a lot of guard hair, and the wool that's associated with it is almost the same micron as the guard hairs. So we have, you know, a thicker and finer version of this weaving. And I've had these tested from the finest flocks, and with sorting, we get microns down to about 18 if it's properly sorted with good breeding, and the different colors that you get from Navajo-Churro. And then showing like, well, what were the weavings and conditions that they were raised back in there. So, and then this one is, yeah. So showing that, you know, everyone is kind of right when it comes to the history and what is out there. It's like the purpose that you want from your flock that is the determining factor for everything that you have. You can get coarse fiber to be fine. Right now for me, I have to blend with merino to get what was there back. There every so often, and Nikyle can probably talk more about it, that the recessive traits that that make color the main variation within the flock are also the same traits that seem to hide the fine wool that's more fine with easily sortable guard hairs. So right now there's abundance of fine wool grays, browns, blacks, and blues. UV stable black is still on the coarse end. It's very hard to find a very fine wool UV stable black. And the white fine is really hard to find. It's very recessive. But Nikyle has done more experiments with that, because I look at the wool and interpret what was there. Nikyle's actually gotten the results that I've been looking for. So that gives you the background of like Navajo-Churro, that, you know, some families were really picky with the breeding and everything, so they have better wool. Some families, they wanted strong ropes and everything, so they have the coarser wools. So we have all these different groups together that make all our weavings. And then sometimes a misunderstanding of what its purpose is why people get upset when they try to weave, spin, or card it, because they're using a wool that wasn't made for that purpose. But you can find it all over Navajo and Spanish families. But more so when we've gone to the Rio Grande, a lot of the anecdotal information from the historic weavers in that area is that Navajos always had the best wool somehow, because we bring what we raise, and it blows the mind out of the families that still weave out there, just from what we've done. So Nikyle can talk about the rest of it. That it's an amazing sheep that will mold to your needs as long as you look out for their best interests. Thank you.
Zefren, thank you for sharing the history and the diversity, or the variability of the fiber of churros, because that was one thing that I was really hoping one of you would bring up today, is that churros aren't just a coarse, you know, lots of guard hair, coarse wool for rugs and felting. There really can be some very fine variability in those flocks, and I'm glad you brought that up.
So yeah, I had the microns tested, so it's verified between 18 to 25 if you have a really good characteristic sorting and you can identify what fiber to use. That puts it up there in the coarsest merino and Rambouillet area, because super merino is down there to 5, but the characteristics are more that of like polyester fleece and silk, that you may not want it because it's so fine. And, you know, tailors can attest that super merino is a horrible fabric to be working with, versus, you know, regular merino that's in the 12 and 15. So we have that now. It was probably more geared towards stable, fine wools with easily sortable guard hairs in the early part of the 17th century. And it has gone both ways between that. And that in my timeline, the other characteristics of coarse hair and forehorns may be a product of overbreeding during the Spanish Reconquest. There are mentions that there was just a flock of 5,000 that was bred into a flock of 150,000 sheep that accompanied the Spanish Reconquest. And that was all done in El Paso, I think in the 1690s, around there. And that's the core of where you find the coarse flocks that they identify as Churro or Navajo-Churro, but coarse. Sorry. Go, Nikyle.
Nikyle,
I have
are
to
you
admit that I really feel like, oh yes, I'm here. And I was just gonna say that I feel like I can't follow that up with anything because Zefren is just a whole wealth of knowledge. But is there, what would you like me to pick up on, Zefren? Is it the color? Color and quality, I think is what you mentioned.
Well, I'm hypothesizing that the brown and these colors have more of the fine wool with easily sortable guard hair, simply because of what I've seen in blankets. And I was hoping that you would have observed the same results, or if you observed something different from that, because you've been doing a lot of work trying to find what is recessive in Navajo-Churro, and the stuff that you've been looking for, the recessivity, is actually resulting in more color diversity and finer wool.
Sure. Yeah, I can elaborate on that for sure. So most recently, well, recently as in 15 years ago, I've been working on the color genetics in my flock, only because the Navajo-Churro are one of a handful of heritage breeds in the world that are able to express color patterns. And in that time, it was just so fascinating. You know, you read the characteristics of Navajo sheep written by Cecil Blunn in the 1940s for the Southwest Research Laboratory. And in there, they identify patterned Navajo sheep. And I have been most fortunate to have also spoke to many elders throughout the years, as well as my own grandparents, who can recount these different colors that these sheep had once had before there was a Western push for the production of white wool. So a lot of my work has been geared to see how much of those recessive color patterns I can pull out. And I can attest to what Zefren is saying about the handle and the coarseness changing depending on what I am controlling in my little breeding groups. I have taken, for example, white sheep. I have taken white sheep that are patterned white, and I have taken white sheep that are actually just one giant white spot. And the way I identify those is the patterned sheep will kind of always show its base color, genetically sheep, no matter the breed that you have, whether it's the best merino or a Katahdin. Every sheep in the world is either black or brown genetically. Brown being the most recessive. And then you skip over to the next, and this is all found in different loci, or the different locus, genetically speaking. The first one is called the base locus, and that controls the color of the animal. So like I said, either animal is either black or brown, and then you move to another location called the extension, and this extension gene will turn the switches, so to say, on or off and it'll allow the animal to express color pattern or not. So if an animal is what we call extension dominant, it'll be solid brown or solid black. And this is where this ties into what Zefren was saying. I have used extension dominant sheep or rams on my ewes who are primarily patterned. And I found that their offspring had a finer handle. So these sheep, I've never gotten them tested, like the micron count. I have never done that, but as a weaver, I feel I can see more with my hands. So those animals that have had actually been extension dominant, solid black or brown, they had a very fine handle. So going into the next location, which is the agouti location, and that's the area or the genes that allow pattern expressions like badger face, black and tan, and even white. I found that if I solely want white sheep and I'm using that agouti location to extract more white, my fleeces tend to become more coarse, or they gain a lot more kemp. And there is another genetic location called the spotting location, and this controls the on-off switches of the spots that a sheep will express. So you could have a Jacob-looking, sheep with big patches of spots, or you could have one that just has a white crown and a white tail tip, depending on how much of those genetics are in play. So going back to my first experiment, I've taken one white sheep that is agouti pattern white, and I've taken one that was solid white because it was from a spot, and found that when I mated the two, I got one of each. I got a pattern white, and I also got a big giant spot on a black sheep. Now, the pattern white, like I said, it kind of tended to be more coarse, and it showed in that offspring. And the other one that was solid black with large patches on it had a softer handle. So even within that one experiment, I got, I was able to expand my theory on breeding these patterns and spots and extension to create a better handle of wool.
That's really interesting.
I'm pretty sure that I confused everybody by now.
Nikyle, have you published any articles on that yet?
No, it's just all in various notebooks.
Okay, we'll talk offline about that. Do we have any photos we can show, Brittany? Some of Nikyle's work, some of Zefren's work, if we have it.
I think Cyndi mentioned, is this the one you were talking about, Cyndi, with the sheep and the stained?
Yeah, I thought this might be good to show a little bit about the animals. This is basically a black ewe, right? And as they age, they'll get lighter and lighter, more white in their outer coat. So you can easily see the inner outer coat on this animal. She's staying dark on the inside, light on the outside, and a finer fleece on the inner and a coarser for the outer coat. I've measured, I've taken some measurements on my microns, not recently, but I've had it as low as 20 microns. And most of them don't go much over 32 or so, 35. But every now and then you have an animal that can be very coarse in the outer coat with a lot of what we call medullated fiber, and those can go way up to 60. And then the length will vary quite a bit. So maybe Nikyle, you can say something. You look at the sheep from a different point of view than I do, but looking at that animal and that wool, what do you see? Or that?
So I'll be speaking as a as what I look for as an inspector for the Navajo-Churro Sheep Association. Whatever I say, I just have to put a disclaimer out there, does not reflect the views or beliefs of the Navajo-Churro Sheep Association, and this is my personal opinion. But Cyndi, with your ewe that's on the screen right now, I see that she is a very fine specimen. And what I, as an inspector, as a weaver, as a shepherd, would look for if I'm inspecting a flock or if I'm breeding my own sheep. There's that uniformity of her fleece that starts from her neck all the way to her breeches. And that is something that is very prized because as a hand spinner myself, you know, I'm in a sense having to do more, what was the word? Cleaning wool. I'm having to skirt a fleece more because the areas, and I see this a lot with Navajo-Churro, is that some of them will not have that outer coat along the top line. I will find that as I'm skirting, those animals that don't have the outer coat or who have a sparse outer coat on the top line, they tend to have a buildup of dirt and debris, as opposed to these animals who have a nice, even length and uniform length throughout the fleece. You'll see less of that. So there is something about the length of wool and the uniformity of Navajo-Churro wool that just makes it easier to process. So again, going back to what I would look for as, say, an inspector, this ewe has a very nice clean face. She has 4 clean legs, and traditionally that would be great out on the range here on the reservation, because if she had an enclosed face like a commercial type wool sheep, you know, she would have wool blindness. And out here, I mean, I'm sure it's the same everywhere. You have coyotes, you have wolves, cougars, bobcats. You know, it just makes them vulnerable for not being able to see their surroundings. And she has clean legs. So the emphasis on clean legs isn't just a wool skirting issue. It also helps them maneuver around, let's say, like my area. There's a lot of salt brush. I find that the immature ewes that haven't shed the fuzz or the wool on their hind legs, they're dragging back literal bushes behind them. They're dragging back whatever. And if you think about that, if they have, you know, like a twig or something that would hinder their ability to escape or evade a predator, you know, that's also another issue. I mean, I'm not saying that these animals are bred this way primarily to evade predators, but, you know, they also stem from the Spanish and Portuguese chura from their respective countries. And if you look at those sheep, they also have clean faces, clean legs. I don't know why, because I don't raise those sheep, but, you know, it's kind of in our breed standard to keep true to what has been here since they've been here, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Oh, and, you know, just off the record, and me as a person, this sheep would definitely pass registration.
She's a very pretty ewe, that's for sure. Do we have any, Nikyle, do we have any photos of your work, your weaving, that we could share? I'd love to highlight some of your work.
I could share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me pull that up.
I have 3 videos I want to share. They're like 10 seconds after Nikyle's done.
Sure, I'm just giving Google Chrome access to my thing. So,
and I I have a picture in there somewhere on one of my slides of those, what is still left in Spain of the Churro. A lot of those breeds are extinct there too, but yeah, it's not that important, but it's in there.
I think, Cyndi, when you fell off the chat, we were going to talk about or take a look at everybody's artwork.
Yeah.
And then I think it might be time to start addressing questions.
Yeah, we need to.
Any.
I logged out by accident. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. You're back now.
I hit the wrong button.
Okay, it looks like my screen is up there.
Yeah.
So here is a fine representation of my work. This is a woven saddle pad that is adorned with locks of Navajo-Churro wool.
I love that, Nikyle.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
Really?
I was jokingly telling the Fowler Museum last week that I named this one the Bachelor's Pad, only because traditional stories say that Navajo mothers used to adorn their available sons' saddle blankets or saddle pads with either wool tufts or fringe or with tassels, so if they're out there, going about whatever business they're going about and they have this showing in the back of their saddle, those other mothers with available daughters are like, oh, well, there's a single guy right there, and hey, I have a single daughter.
That's a great system.
So it was, maybe the sons thought it was like a flashy saddle blanket, to have, when in reality it had a hidden meaning.
It was an advertisement.
But oh yes. So this piece is woven with a count called the Broken Diamond, and as you can see, it kind of looks like the beginnings of a diamond, but it opens up to another diamond. Depending on where you are on the reservation, these twill counts carry different stories. And in one part of the reservation, I've heard of this twill count referred to as the horned toad's head. And if you look at the little diamonds there, they do look like the shape of a horned toad's head. And then on my side of the reservation, I've heard them refer to this as the horned toad's armor, meaning his skin. If you look at a horned toad, they have these cool scales that make it look like armor. And traditionally in our culture, we do believe that the horned toad is a very wise warrior being. And here is a zoomed in view of the tufts.
So, Nikyle, having this pattern on a saddle blanket, does that give the rider a particular energy or spirit? Am I making things up?
But from what I do know, being a weaver myself and listening to the teachings of my grandmothers, a lot of these blankets were woven for the protection of the rider. So, I can't speak for other Navajo who weave this pattern, but, at least for my grandma, who has a son who's a veteran, I'm pretty sure she would have woven it with the intent of keeping him safe while he was in the military, or the Navy, I'm sorry. So I think it all depends on the intent and the spirituality behind it.
It's a beautiful blanket.
Is it my turn?
Thank you. Oh, yeah, Zefren is probably just anxious to share some of his weavings.
I'm gonna be quick. Timing. Okay, so
Heard that
hello
before.
to- Okay, so I was able to find that testing here of the sorted Navajo fine. And on average, it was 20, which means half of it was down there. So probably with better sorting, I could get it down to that much. So the comfort factor, what they use with the modern wool testing, excuse me, was approaching 60, 70% versus the other. What was funny was that once I had this tested, the person who ran the testing closed up shop and left. They didn't give me my printout, but luckily I was able to take the the screenshot. This one, if you go for those color characteristics that Kyle talked about and process the wool traditionally and weave it traditionally, this is the handle that comes up in the wool.
Wow.
So it's light and it's floating with just the air coming off the. And a lot of archaeological examples of Navajo weaving at time are just all black and brown. Here's an example of a 17th century Navajo chief blanket.
That's beautiful. Zefren, how did they achieve that blue?
I've done my own experiments on this one. For this type of blue, I'm sure they're using whatever the Chimaya weavers are using to get really even blue, which means they have access to metal tools and perhaps chemicals in order to, or even purified lye to get this one. That variation where you get like white, dark blue, light blue within the indigo, which is typical of Navajo slave blankets and early Chimaya weavings, that is actually human urine, more on the adult side. I have not experimented using oral tradition where we would use urine from individuals that haven't reached puberty. Perhaps maybe that is the key to getting this really even dark color fast blue. But I have a theory that they had access to something that was different and new at the time that got that blue. So this one's on the handle. This is a weaving that has 120 wefts per inch woven vertically. And the warp count is approaching 40 to 32 per inch. So this is using nothing but merino-like Navajo-Churro that comes in the blue or brown that this black is. It's overdyed with indigo, and then the natural white. So when you have those characteristics, this is how that wool spins. That you can get cotton-like wool from that. And this was just showing some of my current projects using archaeological, historic, I guess ancestral Pueblo twill tapestry, weaving different colors within a diamond twill. So this is the current weaving that I have behind me, showing you the process to weave that.
That is
so
lovely.
This is where I do the different experiments with traditional. So this one's based off painted board fragments from Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon dating to the 1000s. That this symbology and this weaving technique go hand in hand. And the symbols are representative of South America and Central America before and after Chaco.
It's gorgeous. How long does a tapestry like that take you to complete?
Well, right now, it's running up to about a year. And this is some of the examples of my other work, how I've done European-style weaving with Navajo interlocking diamond twill tapestry and upright loom, combining spraying to get offset counts that do special effects for the colors that I did So I don't know. I think this one can show you some of that. You know, combining the different types of weavings and Navajo weaving to show you that all weaving traditions can have other ways of doing things. So this is me using a European loom with a Navajo design mindset, using color. And this is actually with two colors, using a base of warp that's in black and white and alternating warp sets. This was a part of my COVID recovery. So this was in my room, so it allowed me to weave while I was recovering from COVID. This is a picture of like the different styles of wool and how that wool looks like when you're processing it. I'm sorry I'm going through this really quick. I'm trying to find a good representation of what happens with Navajo-Churro under the right conditions. I thought I had that picture up. This is showing 1880s style of processing wool. This was for the historic opening of the Spanish Trail at Aztec Ruin. I'm giving presentations to elementary students. And I know I'm going to hit it somewhere down here. If you go to my Instagram, you can see my journey with Navajo weaving all the way up to now. I'm trying to find a processing video. That's with dyeing. I'm getting near there. This one's weaving that black and white or brown. Almost there. Getting close. I'll just stop there because we need to keep going. Is that Navajo-Churro that has the feel of chief blankets are usually the ones that display this kind of property when you're cleaning them, that they have a tendency to stay in one group by their fiber. If you pull it, you can actually spin from these without having to card them, which I think is why was one of the characteristics of these early ways of spinning, was that there was no carding involved in it, that they could get these little rovings pulling from the fleece directly. And that was, the secret that, it skipped a whole step in processing. And this is showing some of those early examples of getting luster just from doing that process. So I'll end it there because I don't want to keep going on. So yeah, all my work is available on Instagram, and then I have the links there. Just doing archaeological and early 17th century Navajo style weaving. That's why Nikyle's work is crucial. Making sure that people understand why Navajo-Churro and why it's so important, and why we need to keep maintaining this, even cross-culturally with the Chimaya weavers, because that is also part of their tradition. That some of the bias against it is there on purpose to try to diminish its importance.
Thank you, Zefren. Rose, I definitely don't want to leave you out. Do you want to share some photos or talk a little bit about your weaving techniques? Yours and Eugene?
Sure. I had sent you some photos. If you bring them up, I can talk about it. This is a recent piece that Eugene created. After I counted all of the crosses that he put up, I think there's 33 crosses, which just kind of gave me a chill. That's how many years we've been weaving. He just usually gets on the loom, starts creating. This piece has indigo. It's a commercial red. It is all 100% woolen 4-ply yarns. This is not churro. This falls and classified as Rio Grande Chimaya weaving. He wanted to do something with balanced crosses. I think it, helped him, just to, as we're spending time in isolation, the repetitive pattern was soothing for him, is what I was seeing. And if you'll flip to the next one, let's see, what do we have on that one? Oh, here's a traditional Thunderbird piece that he created for the Chimaya trading post down in Espanola. Mr. Trujillo was wanting some old Fred Harvey style Thunderbird pieces. So we've created some pieces that have influence of the Fred Harvey collection jewelry. And these pieces can be seen at the Chimaya Trading Post, which is actually located in Espanola at the Y, down near the Rio Grande. So our old time masters taught us that a lot of the Chimaya weaving, any of the elements that we would put into it, had to look like birds in flight. So they were connecting with the birds, they were connecting with nature. And if you go to the next slide, let's see what comes up. I think it's probably, okay, here's one that connects with nature. That's the natural dyes of the rabbit brush and chamiso to create two different shades of yellow to do shapes that look like what we call palmas, leaves. And Eugene created this piece during the fall time. He was also playing with the stripe variations of going from small to large to create an optical illusion. So we're always trying to create some type of artistic expression that is going to be pleasing to the eye. Most of our pieces anymore are for art to hang as wall hangings. Let's see what the next slide is. And those are some of my pillows titled Chimaya Pueblo border, and some simple Rio Grande stripe pieces. They're double woven. They're two-sided pillows. And so those would be classified as Chimaya Rio Grande. And those ones are not churro. Those are 100%. Most of these pieces all had 100% USA JH Classicans wool. The coats behind me and the vest behind me do have churro. And those ones are done in Eye of the Growls, the perdiz pattern. I like working in that pattern with different colors, usually natural. I do have one coat in the room that's not being showed that's all natural indigo, and I'm calling that one my bluebird coat. And then again, taking from that we learned from our ancestors here in the area to always get in connection with nature. And so that would be either with our dyeing, with the design elements, the fibers that come from my cousin's farm that we do. It's all connecting to nature.
That's beautiful work, both yours and Eugene's. Really nice work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing. Nikyle, did you have any other photos that you wanted to show before we take questions?
Of my work, or?
Yeah, work or sheep, either one.
Okay,
or did
sure.
you
Maybe...
sorry, I was going to say the other option is we have not talked at all yet about Navajo Lifeway. We really have kind of skirted around that altogether. If you want to take a couple of minutes and talk about that and Sheep is Life, we could do that too.
Sure. So I'll just take a quick minute or two to run through. So the sheep are integral. So sheep are integral to the Navajo way of life. They have played, they have been adapted in so far back. And, evolving from like an agriculture, well, actually hunter-gatherer to agriculture to pastoralism, they've become very, very special to our culture and heritage. I always tell people that who are interested in Sheep is Life that for most of us shepherds and weavers, Sheep is Life begins at birth. And I remember listening to Roy Cady, who is doing the yellow dyeing in the photo. He says he was out shepherding before he was even born. He was in his mother's womb while she was out, rain, snow, or shine, with the sheep. And he trails up the Carrizo Mountains, and so did his mother and their mothers before them. So he's truly living that sheep is life path. So when a lot of us Navajo, when we're born and we have that connection to our mothers by way of the umbilical cord, and that's something very special and sacred to us. So when a few days later it dries and it becomes detached from us, it is put in a very special place. Some people, Navajo, who are home bodies, they say that theirs is placed in the center of their traditional Navajo hogans. Jokingly, some, who are wild and free, and, they say that theirs is placed in a forgetful place, so they're looking for it. That's why they're so scattered, I guess. But for me, and for many of the shepherds that I know, it all started with my paternal grandmother, who has been a shepherd her entire life. When my umbilical cord as an infant came off of me, she placed it in the center of her sheep pen. And as she placed it there, she placed it with the hopes and intent that I would carry on this life way, that I would be, the future of her shepherding line, that I would carry on the weaving, that I would carry on the sheep. So when I came to realize, like, why am I continually wanting to be with the sheep out there? I had asked her that, and she's like, well, when you were a baby, this is where we placed your umbilical cord. So you're going to carry that on. So like, that is the beginning in our mind, not in our mind, but to us, the beginning of the sheep is life culture. And then we're just raised with it. A lot of my earliest memories are of the sheep, like lambing season, shearing season. So that kind of ties into why Dinebe'ina was formed. It was a way to preserve and to educate not only the Navajo people here on the reservation, but also others who live on the outside of it, to teach them and to preserve our pastoral lifeway and to preserve the cultural weaving side of that as well.
Awesome.
Okay. Do you want me to run through all of the slides about the sheep is life, or do you just want to keep going?
How many slides on the sheep is life do you have?
7.
Do you want me to give a quick history on how it started and where we're going, Nikyle?
There's just a few slides, but
Sure.
From over the years, you guys can use as a guide.
Okay, well, there's no particular order to the slides. I'm giving history so you can show what we had. I think these are all from, 2016 to 2017. Sheep is Life started out as a brainchild between the original founders of the Bebe'ina from 1991, which I think kind of blurs into the Navajo Sheep Project and their work from the 70s to the 80s. But in 1997, they received a grant to make a tourist showcase of Navajo weaving. So they united a very prestigious group of Navajo weavers that was inclusive for the first time of male weavers before that, because there was just a perception that women weave before that. So they came together in '97 at San Juan College, and there was this showcase of ancestral knowledge, grandmother knowledge, and there was a combination between the youths that had never seen this or experienced it coming to this, along with the different tourists to buy all the different wools and fiber products. So out of that, it changed from just, working within the economic systems of the trading posts and exploitive economic culture to where it's now, we have a female executive director. The board is slowly becoming fully female, and they're all a Navajo, a fully Navajo board and run organization to still do these teachings of connecting our elders and disenfranchised youth with the cultural knowledge. And that all happens at Sheep is Life. And as a side note to all of that is a showcase that is entertaining for people who have interest in fiber and weavings, and it connects everyone. And we like to use the old Navajo philosophy that to get people together, to get people to share their stories, you have to have food, you have to have the sheep, you have to have the teaching space, and we bring that all together within Sheep is Life. So now the Bebe'ina is, we're still committed to Sheep is Life and growing beyond what it started out as, to as we grow as an organization, to providing more financial support towards our weavers and sheep producers, a partnership with the Navajo-Churro Land Presidium, and connecting more of the youth's education to be better scholars, to be better storytellers in the world, to present education and knowledge in terms of writing and how they tell their story, so that learning how to weave and learning the history of the sheep helps them prepare themselves for academic success. At least it's one of the dreams of DBI, because our mission is always there. You'll see it on NavajoLifeWay.org. Our primary mission is to perpetuate Navajo history and culture, and that mission always changes with the board. So we're in the middle of that change right now. We have a good selection of old, new, male and female, and just to be a legit nonprofit that's looking out for helping the least able among us that have problems finding the sales and support. And that's, it's all on the website. And if you have any more questions, you can drop us an email. That, all the donations there, we fully report on where they go and how we use them. And we're just, COVID made it difficult this year, but we're still trying to adapt to that everyone has a way to adapt. So we're looking to becoming, the future feels bright in terms of that. And I'm treasurer now, and I started this just as a student apprentice to one of the cultural advisors, and now I'm a financial officer going to school for that, getting my degree, and trying to bring all of this together so we can be better storytellers. And we've always included to be inclusive of other fibers, because it's beyond just Navajo weaving. It's felting, it's Chimaya weaving, it's Pueblo embroidery, so many things out there that we're always there to help, because as soon as you cordon something off and say this is special, you make an artificial wall that sets it apart from everyone, that hampers the ability to share information. So that in a nutshell is DBI. The rest of it, you can send an email to our executive director to find out more or to contribute, because we're always looking to help people through our donations. Thank you.
Thanks, Zefren. Thanks for that overview. Brittany, I think we better address questions if we have time.
Yes, we'll go through it quickly. There's a few. Jay says, hi, everybody. He's joining us from a balmy 3 degrees in Michigan. Hi, Jay. Thanks for joining us today. Marilyn is saying hello from upstate New York. Thanks for joining us today, Marilyn. Mark Bosley, thanks for joining us today. He says, "Here sheep for fire control." He's got a friend who said his grandmother and he would collect wool on the trails. We were never shepherds. Just to give you an idea of how old he was. So I guess he was using his sheep for fire control. That's very cool. Travis says hello. Hello, Travis. Thanks for joining us today. Brittany says hello from Hard Valley, California. Thanks for joining us today, Brittany. We're glad you're here.
Another contributor to our All Things Sheep conference, I believe.
Oh, that's wonderful. Gail says hi from Kansas. Hi, Gail. We're glad you're here. She's excited to learn new things. Allison says hello from Santa Fe. Hi, Allison. Thanks for joining us today. Just a few more. Joellen says hello from Joellen. Thanks for joining us today.
There's a question that I want Nikyle to,
Hi, Joellen.
see in the comments. Did you see it? Teresa Schumacher Sherwalt.
Yes. All right. Teresa has a question. Thanks for joining us today. She says, "Is Churro Merino cross a good mixing for wool?"
I'll let Nikyle start and I'll finish.
So I wonder if she is talking about like actually crossing the two breeds, like breeding to cross, or mixing and blending the wool after it's shorn. Maybe.
Let's assume she's talking
in terms
about
of breeding. Yeah. Okay. In terms of breeding, I would say that no, it is not a good cross, because it, you're bringing a very fine wool and not a very coarse wool, but a coarse wool together. And from what I've seen, the wool is either so thick, like all my wool terminology just went out the window now. Like it just produces like a hard to manage type wool that is, in my opinion, very time consuming to process. I haven't noticed that it changes the handle, like it doesn't make it softer or it doesn't make it any more coarse. It just creates a different staple, that's for sure. And Zefren, take it from here.
Okay. Well, I've researched technical manuals for wool sorters and people who made the machines from the 19th century to process wool. Merino and Rambouillet started off as a royal wool that was used with royal tools to produce fine wool. And as soon as everything got mechanized, the breeding really took off, because mechanization created a whole new type of wool specification that these breeds had to be bred so that the wool fiber would mesh with the machinery. So there's about 300 years that puts the type of wool fiber that Navajo-Churro, what we're used to what is now commercial breeds and merino. So when you put the two together, you kind of pull the merino back into that flux where they were trying to find what would work with the machines. So you'll get really fine fibers that are really long that will gum up machines, or you will get very thick, coarse fibers with lots of hemp that is so saturated with yolk and lanolin that it gums up the machines. I will process crossbred. It just takes a lot more work, probably double the time and labor just to make a good product out of it, versus if you just have just merino or just Navajo-Churro to begin with. And it's a mess to get these breeds through a machine. you got to go back to what they had to use back then, where you're soaking the wool in benzene and all these different petrochemical solvents just to get down to the hairs. And then you have to have a skilled wool sorter. You need someone who knows how to sort one fleece into 64 grades of wool and have enough of that sorting so you have enough to run through the machine, because you'll lose about 30% of the wool just to loading the machine up for processing. This is why, you know, the mills have problems, you know, working with different types of breed, because the machines get accustomed to a certain style of wool. So you really need machines tailored to that kind of wool. Just there's so many different things, and it's horrible to process. Like I said, it gets fine and long. It's loaded with yolk. You don't add anything to Navajo-Churro by crossing it with a commercial breed. You just bring the commercial breed back to when they were trying to breed for the machines. And then it takes at least 7 to 6 generations to stabilize whatever trait that you're trying to get from the crossbred. So people who do that, unless you get your great-great-great-grandchildren on board with what you're trying to do, you may not be able to find a use for whatever you're doing. And then there's just so much genetic variation. Sometimes you'll get a long, fine wool of a reasonable micron that will go through machine processing. But that's like 10% of all the crossbred wools you find out there. So I would not recommend. Yeah, it adds too much variables to what you're doing. And obviously I'm emotional about it because everyone thinks they can just breed and voila, you have what you need. You don't, because we're talking with an ancestral sheep bred with a sheep that has had 300 years of breeding recessive traits out there. And when you bring all those back, it just brings out all of that back out of it. But I do recommend blending. You can blend Merino and Rambouillet as part of the breeding process to try to get back these older characteristics. Because you need 20 microns in that range on average in order to get skeins in the 6,000 per pound lace weight or finer type yarn that some weavers in Chimaya and Navajos were dealing with every day. Where you could get a chief size blanket that weighed about 1.5 pounds at most. We're talking 109 inches by 62. That only weighed 1.5 pounds. That was waterproof and airproof. Served its purpose more like tarp because of the way it was woven. And that's what me and Nikyle and all the Navajo weavers have been trying to do for the past 100 years, is to get back to that. A weaving that would serve as a bucket if you needed to, if you had nothing else to put water in, so that if you were in places where water was hard to access, you could still water your horse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thorough answers.
Zefren, I was just going to say, Zefren, you took all of the words right out of my mouth.
Perfect.
Thank you.
What else we got, Brittany?
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you for that.
So an ending? No, don't do it.
Let's see. Joanne wants to know, does Churro taste better than the crosses and other sheep?
Yes.
Yeah, they do. You know, going back right quick to that previous question, I will say that there is another breed here on the reservation that are unique to the Navajo people because they were bred from churros in the Southwest breeding station, and then they were dispersed throughout the reservation whenever that had ended. In that time, they bred everything from Romney, Corriedale, Rambouillet, and a few other breeds into Navajo-Churro to try to keep that trait of adaptability to the Southwest as well as their mothering skills. And it actually just resulted in a very small heritage-looking Rambouillet, something similar to this Santa Cruz Island sheep, and even similar looking to the Gulf Coast native, which I know Joellen raises, as well as like the Florida crackers. And here on the reservation, you know, they're not referred to as any specific breed other than just stemming from churro. And through my experience, they do have a very nice handle, but they also have certain amounts of Kemp in them. So if you're fortunate enough to get one of those sheep and kind of breed them up back to Merino Rams, I think that would be great. Maybe one of these days I'll share pictures of what I'm talking about, of the breed. I can't really call them a breed because they're not established. They're just kind of sheep that are just here, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure Zefren has seen them as well. But here on the reservation, a lot of us call them.
My dad interrupted my attention.
Oh,
what did I need?
Zefren, I was just going back. I was just going back and talking about the sheep that were dispersed, that were bred up from churros at the Southwest Breeding Lab in Fort Wingate. A lot of them were crossed with Merino, Rambouillet, what did I say? Corriedale, Romney, and other finer or medium wool breeds. And they're kind of just here. The only difference is you look at their face, you look at their legs, you look at their build, they look like a churro. But when they grow out their wool, they look more like similar to a Santa Cruz sheep or Gulf Coast natives or even Florida crackers. I think the only thing that you could really differentiate between them is the amount of Kemp that they have. So I was just saying that we really don't have a name for these sheep here. Like they just kind of exist. So I was also going to add that, short for reservation and slang is Rez, R-E-Z. So a lot of us, we distinguished that type of sheep as Rez Belay, only because they have the same structure of fleece.
Yes, I've seen this one. The biggest concentration of what Nikyle's mentioning ended up in Two Gray Hills, and that's the secret of why Two Gray Hills weaving, with just the tan, the brown, and the gray, isn't within that group. They have published works from the sheep laboratory that was at Fort Wingate, which was also part of the Indian Service, which was the Department of Interior. They were under the bias that Navajo-Churro had some benefits that they wanted, but they also wanted marketability with the Army surplus within the fiber products. They wanted something Navajos could raise that would mesh seamlessly with the wool program that the Army wanted, where they always wanted to use these wool. Because the hidden history of it is that early in the 1800s, it was already identified that there was overgrazing because there was such productivity among the richer Navajos that bought prime Rambouillets from the East Coast, that hired Mexican and poorer families to herd all over Colorado, that they had very high quality Rambouillet and Merino sheep as early as the 1880s, 1890s, that they were forced to sell it for pennies on the dollar to the Army, who also took those sheep to redistribute out north. And these are some of the founding flocks that become the Wyoming, the Dakota sheep farmers in that region when that area first started getting legislative and gubernatorial organization. And we got the offspring of what they were raising back in the 1930s during livestock reduction, when the laboratory determined that this is what we needed because these sheep are land race, when really they just gave our sheep back that already had those characteristics that were bred into them. But what they did was they crossbred that sheep with some of the Navajo-Churro sheep that may have been bred for certain types of fiber only, that were maybe less than 150 or so identified into that project. And so they turned into like this whole breeding program where it was hit or miss, that they identified that their work may have not have been in the best interest of Navajo weavers in it. I think Nikyle has a copy of it. And that the ones that were predate what they did were actually better at the fiber and the uses that those families were using them for, which is what we've already found out. So that Res Boulay was one of the only stable crosses that gives you really nice fiber in those colors that Churro people would use. The only thing is that it has more crimp in the wool than is what would be in a fine wool Navajo Churro. And you'd have a propensity to have a little bit more lanolin, but you can deal with it. Unless they're grown in very tight conditions, they're horribly, horribly labor intensive to get all the vegetable matter out of them because of the way the wool grows. Yeah, and all of that's available online because it was all government funded data. The Navajo Laboratory. This is the part of what becomes a founding flock for Lyle McNeil's work for the Navajo Sheep Project. And then there was wild breeds that escaped mission control that were wild in California that may have been more related to the ancestral Iberian sheep. That was also brought into the sheep project at Wingate. And people have brought that sheep into Navajo-Churro. And those fleeces it's counterproductive because it produces the same type of results as if you take a commercial breed with any Navajo-Churro. So it's all about the fiber and keeping track of your breeding, which is why I love Nikyle and the Navajo Land Presidium and all the other registries, because they're trying to keep track of that now. But now they're just barely starting to have dialogue with indigenous knowledge. I said, this is what we look for in the sheep. And a lot of times they're completely ignored when it comes to the registry. So there's dialogue now, at least to have more inclusive knowledge on where we want these sheep. And as people raise Navajo-Churro now, and this is part of the exploitive culture, they just label Navajo-Churro on it. And it could be any one of these types of sheep, and they charge a premium price. And they're selling a product that someone may use, and it totally turns them off to it simply because it's marketed wrong. It's been identified wrong. So we have competing ideologies, philosophies when it comes to it. Like, what's ethical for everyone? What gets the money to the person that does the most work with? And that's also part of what DBI is doing right now. As there's a lot of fine fiber Navajo-Churro that are on the reservation, but yet what gets premium prices off reservation is something that is very coarse wool that is sold as Navajo-Churro. So the dialogue is about that. So there's so many different subcategories of fiber. We could talk all day about it.
I wish we had that time. We've got about 5 minutes left, I think, to answer any other questions that may have come in. But yeah.
There's a lot of love that's on the chat today of people just enjoying everything that everyone's shared today, their stories, their knowledge. So just thank you very, very much for that. Please read through the comments later if you have time to see all the love that people are sharing. I think that Cyndi, you had a couple comments about the meat from the previous question, and then maybe we just wrap things up because we're well over 2 hours, and this has just been such a wonderful discussion. And but we do have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my shoulder is just really sore, folks. If I've been fidgety, but yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that meat question because Churro put the fat in their bellies. They look really pot-bellied. you know, sometimes it's hard to tell they're pregnant. It's just fat in their belly. That's where they put it, not on their butt. Commercial sheep are bred to put fat in the meat and on the rump. So we have a very lean meat. The fat is not in the meat. It's not in the rear end. So yes, they do hang small. The carcass weight is kind of light compared to a commercial one. However, the meat to bone ratio is high. The bones are small. There's a lot of meat on those little animals. And so your yield isn't that bad. It's surprisingly high. And the flavors are very light, lean. A lot of people don't even know they're eating lamb when I serve it. So the chefs really love it. So it's a very highly flavorful, valued meat product, which goes along with the wonderful wool. And then we don't do much with the milk, but they're really good milk producers too.
And I'll just take a minute to add the reason why that the smaller carcass is preferred is survival wise. If you can have a child or a teenager use flint knives, they can still disarticulate the entire carcass just by themselves. Versus commercial breeds now where you need a team in order to take it apart, and you need metal tools. And yeah, you need metal tools, a very, very, very sharp knife and a hammer, or the rib cutters, bolt cutters to disarticulate a commercial sheep now. So the difference is in a carcass, like a sheep that weighs about 75 to 50 pounds would have been in what they would have wanted, versus now where the, you know, some of the bigger sheep breeds I've seen are almost starting to push 200. I'll end it with that.
Interesting. Thank you.
I would just like to add a little bit to what Cyndi said. I don't have the experience where my sheep are pot-bellied because they carry the fat in the stomach. Yes, the fat around the stomach, the caul fat, does increase, but they do not become pot-bellied. They do carry a little fat in their tail, and they do carry a little on their brisket. However, the meat doesn't marble. Before we go, I would just like to share two photos of the representation of my sheep. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
okay. So if you look at the white sheep, she is what we refer to as a old type Navajo sheep. She is long-legged. She has a long, narrow body. Narrow meaning that she's not like plump with a lot of bone or heavy boned. As you can see, both animals, they have a clean face and they have clean, long legs. And they were bred this way, again, I'll just reiterate, to carry them better on the land. And as you can see in the picture on the left, they have that terrain behind them that they would have to be swift and light on their feet to manage to get up and around it, right? So going back to the comment that they get pot-bellied, I don't see that on the reservation. I do see that they do carry more fat, caul fat, engulfing their stomach, their actual ruminant, as well as on their kidneys. And I do see a little bit of fat that will pop up on the tail and on the brisket.
They're beautiful sheep, and their fleeces look so different.
Pot-belly is probably an overstatement, but that's where they carry most of their fat. And
sounds like different.
Ideally, you don't want an overly fat animal anyhow. So
yeah, sounds like different environments lead to slightly different physiques.
Well, it's not the environment; it's the husband.
For sure.
Thanks, Nikyle, for sharing those. That was helpful. This
You're
has been
welcome.
fantastic chat, you guys. Very, very educational, informative. And your work, all of you, is just amazing. The weavings. And even though you only briefly touched on it, Zefren, it looks like you're going to be an amazing silversmith as well. Those pictures on Instagram looked fabulous. Thank you all for joining us. This has been a great chat. Brittany, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I will share links to everyone's websites and Instagrams so that you can check out more of their work. So please do that. And I'll also share the PDF that Chef Zefren shared earlier with the history. So if people would like to see that and to learn more about that, we'll have that as well.
And it has a disclaimer. It's preliminary work. I'm still trying to get down to the primary sources of that because, you know, I do want to publish this at some point. You know, it might give someone a head start, but, you know, if we're all on the idea of knowledge should be shared, I'm okay with that. Just, you know, if you're going to use it, let me know.
Yes, please let him know and give credit for credit to you. But I think that's it for everybody today. Please join us again next week, and we will see you then. We hope everyone has a great week. Thanks again to everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.